In this lesson, I want to talk about changes over time in our P5 environment. And that will allow us to create movement of our sketches. So before I continue, I would like to remind you that you can use the print command to print out information to the console window. And sometimes you might want to print out a variable such as X in order so that you can see what's going wrong with your program if it's not working right, or to keep track of something. And of course, don't forget to use comments where necessary. So changes over time. You have two built-in functions, and the first one is setup. So every time you start a new sketch, there's a setup function there. The setup function runs once at the beginning of your program execution, and that's it. So that's where you would do your initial variable setup or whatever you need to do. In our case, that's where we would set up our frame rate. The second function that's always there when you create a new sketch is the draw function. And the draw function runs over and over and over again many times per second at your frame rate. To go with that, we have a couple of built-in frame functions or variables that we can use. And the first one is frame rate. And the frame rate allows you to set how often the code and draw is executed. And it's rate per second. So if you set the frame rate to 1, it will redraw at 1 frame per second, so once per second. You need to set your frame rate up in your setup function, and then it's done. We also have a frame count, and the frame count changes with every frame, and it starts at 0. So every frame, it'll go up. So if your frame rate is set at 1, every time a second goes by, this frame count will go up by 1. And we can use that frame count to create an animation. So what I want you to do is to open a new project, set your frame rate to 1, and then later experiment with it. And I want you to console.log, in other words, output your frame count, and see how fast things change. We can create an animation using frame count. So in this example here, you can see that this ellipse is being drawn at frame count for the X coordinate, and the Y coordinate is not changing. Okay, this is X, this is Y. The width is 100, but this is changing. So create this in a project, run it, and see what happens. After that, I want you to open up your 5-Rex program that you did in lesson 2, and I want you to modify it to draw rectangles whose horizontal, sideways, X, is based upon the frame rate. When you've got that done, send a snip of your results, not your code, into the meeting chat, and then you can continue. Lost my mouse. Your rectangles, because their color is changing, and your Y position can still change based upon the X, if you can look back and see how that worked. And each rectangle should be a separate entity from the other rectangles. And give that one a shot.